Designing a bicycle, how hard can it be? Well, to find out, I'm joined by Dom Thomas from Fairlight Cycles. Thanks for joining me today, Dom.
No problem.
Let's dive straight in, and I want to ask you how you got into the bike business, how you started designing bikes, and for any viewers watching who might be interested in a career in designing bikes, what advice would you give to them to get started?
I did engineering at university, actually chemical engineering, which isn't particularly relevant to bikes, but in the first year in the modules that I was taking, a lot of materials stuff, so I had an engineering knowledge, if you like. Certainly at that point I wasn't thinking about bike design, but I was a mountain biker. I loved my cycling. I finished uni, I went out to London. My girlfriend at the time had a proper job down there, so I started working in a shop, bike shop. It was in Evans. It was back in the day, there was only, I think, 8 Evans shops. And I did that for a couple of years, started being assistant manager, and I decided at that point that I really wanted to develop a career in the industry, but I wanted to use some of my engineering skills and try and get more into a design type job. So I left Evans and I went to work at Pace, who are obviously a well-known, sort of an iconic British mountain bike brand. At the time they were making their own frames and forks. So I worked there. I spent 3 years working there, working really close with the owners, sort of in a technical sales role. But it was very hands-on. We all did a lot of testing. We had a lot of input on the products. I was literally riding with the owner, weekly on group rides. And Adrian, who I learned a lot from here, is a brilliant bike designer, really sort of thinking outside the box, really original ideas. And then they got bought by DC Swiss. I then went over to Madison, who distributed DT, and I sort of helped launch the suspension through Madison and the wheels and all the rest of it. I also did some other brands. I did that for a couple of years. I was actually about to leave Madison to try and move forward with this sort of idea of getting into bike design, and Madison offered me the role of running Genesis. They knew I had some background at Pace and engineering type elements, so I took on Genesis and did that for 3 years, which was great. We had some really good growth. We released a lot of new products, and it was just I think we had a really strong period for that brand then. And then I went and did Wold, which is sort of hand built. I don't want to get too much into it, but it was I really wanted to add something to my portfolio in terms of building up more knowledge, more of a hands-on knowledge, more of a deep understanding of the process. And I did that for 2 years. We did custom bikes, small production bikes. We had 3 of us in the team, invested a lot in tooling and machinery. And then after that, I went on to do Fairlight with my business partner, John. John also owns Swift Cycles, which is a separate business, but he's also involved in Fairlight. And he approached me saying, I really want to do the brand, and we talked about it, we talked about ideas, and Fairlight was born. And we're now 2.5, 3 years into that, and yeah, it's gone well.
You learned quite a few things along the way.
Learned a lot of things, and I think with any job, it's learning is a huge part of it. You learn so much through the journey. And if I look at the bikes I'm doing now, although they seem, I look at it and think, that's obvious of why it is the way it is now, but actually it's only the way it is now because of all the things I learned along the way. So you're always learning, you're always developing your skills as a designer or whatever it is you're doing. Yeah.
When you're designing a bike, is there a clear starting point? And what's the process involved in designing a bike?
The process is, I suppose, in my head, I break it up into sections. There's sort of distinct sections of the design. So the initial thing would be a conceptual idea of what the bike is going to be. Obviously, as an industry, or like any industry, we have a habit of giving things a particular name: gravel bike, road bike, and I'll try and think a little bit more outside of the box. So we'll think about what size tyres we're going to run on the bike, what is the exact terrain we're riding the bike, is it going to be ridden on more than one type of terrain? And it will fall under one of those categories, but we're trying not to focus too much on the terminology of it, more in terms of how is this bike going to be used? So that'll be the first decision. And then you've also got the other sort of sections. You've got geometry and fit. A lot of the geometry I'll think about towards the end. I'll have a rough idea of numbers, but quite quickly I want to attain chainstay length, for example, because that will affect tubing selection. and fork length. So if we're making a custom fork, which we have done on the Can and the Strail, quite quickly I'll need to know, right, what length do we need the fork, what offset. And when you're looking at offset, you take into account the whole geometry, so you're getting particular trail numbers. So we've got long lead times and quite a long development process for the carbon stuff. So I'll try and chainstay length, fork features, I'll try and get those thought about quite early on. Then you've got tubing and dropouts. That's a whole sort of section, quite a big section. I'll probably come back to that in a minute. And then you've got, I suppose, you could call it like functional add-ons. So rack mounts, mudguard mounts, dynamo boosting, things like that. So all these elements, actually, they all cross over because, you know, you're not just designing a bike then adding it on. You might have to adjust the tubing design, because if you're riding a bike where you're taking 50 kilos of weight, you might need bigger seat stays, or if it's going to be heavily front loaded, you might need a bigger top tube or something. And then, so you've got fitting geometry, tubing, functional add-ons. I would then look at what I would call sort of the jewellery. And the jewellery is stuff that doesn't necessarily have any effect on the way the bike rides, but it's also not a functional add-on, it's more of an aesthetic thing. So, for example, on the bike we have back here, the way that we join the dropouts to the seat and chainstays, they could be welded on, which would be the most simple process, but they're brazed and then shaped by hand. So it's an aesthetic finishing detail that I think brings the product up to a level and gives it that final sort of layer. Things like the cable guide, I mean, it's obviously a functional part, but you could still have the cable guides here if you were going super utilitarian. So that obviously has a functional element, but it is still a sort of a jewellery element, because you are developing a final aesthetic and a final function, but it's not affecting the ride or the characteristic.
So somewhere engineering meets kind of aesthetics, and then
engineering,
sort of balance
aesthetics.
Between the two,
yeah, I mean, I wouldn't say it's about. My focus is always the engineering. That is the main thing. So geometry is critical. Tubing is big, because. So I'll come back to tubing again, but fit and geometry. The geometry is what affects how the bike handles. So the head angle, the trail, chainstay length, wheelbase, bottom bracket drop, those are the things that are affecting how quickly the bike will steer, how stable it is, how slow it steers. Maybe it's a specific geometry for loading the bike if you're carrying a lot of weight. Fit is completely different to that. Fit is how you put the person on the bike, which is what we do for Fairlight. Although this isn't about Fairlight, we've got the two different head tube lengths to try and fit people on it. So once you've got your angles for your handling, the tubing is about how the bike feels underneath you in terms of how stiff it is, or how comfortable it is, or the combination of the two. Again, we take into account the type of bike it is. If it's a road bike, it needs to be quite stiff. But because our bikes are sort of multifunctional, in that you can do an Audax on a Strail, you could also do some light touring on it. I also want an element of comfort, so I do a lot of work with Reynolds on the tubing, and that's quite a time-consuming process, because I'm having a lot of ideas, and I'm going to Reynolds and saying, can you do this or can you do that? And quite often they'll say yes, or sometimes they'll say no, and we need to go back and readdress the whole process of how we make the tube in some instances. So yeah, across every element, you are trying to be as diligent and rigorous with every type of the design and pull it all together.
Yeah. And through the process,
do you have
a kind of an ideal customer for that bike in mind? Like, with this bike behind us is a gravel and adventure bike, and the customer is probably a bit sort of, it's unknown at the moment. It's a new category. So how do you decide?
It is unknown. I mean, I think one thing I've learnt through Genesis, through World, through this, is that actually quite a selfish way, you're almost designing a product for yourself in some ways, a bike you want to ride, and I don't think we're a lot different to a lot of other people, and I think that things that attract me to a bike will probably attract others to a particular bike. And like I said, I do favour sort of multifunctional type bikes, so bikes that can be used for a variety of riding. They're not super niche. I'm not a big fan of really niche products in any field, not just in bikes, that are so specific. So I think that our bikes are, I like to think that they're multifunctional, but also that within the field of steel, that they're absolutely as good as they can be, and there's a huge amount of focus on the whole process of the design. And it is all about the process, all those things I talked about, being diligent with every part of it, asking loads of questions, persevering, and trying to overcome the problems that you have until you're happy with it. Yeah.
What are the biggest constraints, if any, on designing a new model bike?
Constraints. So, I mean, there can be a number of things. So, talking about tubing again, I might have a particular idea for a tube, and I'll speak to Reynolds. So an example of that is there's a new model, or a couple of new models we're working on, one of which I've been working on for a while, and there's a particular chainstay design that I've been trying to do with Reynolds. And every couple of weeks I speak to them, and they say, oh, we can't do it. This is the problem. We need to move the butt from here to here. And literally this week, we had to draw a line under it and say, we can't make this particular chainstay. We can make one that's very, very similar, and it'll be a tiny compromise. And I'll talk openly about what I wanted to achieve, but I mean, it's such a small thing. So things like that, tyre clearance, sometimes you might have to compromise on chainstay width, things like that to fit a certain size of tyre. But again, it's the balance of the compromise. How long do you have your chainstay? What size chainstay do you use? I've got a very strong idea of what I'm trying to achieve in terms of that overall balance through stuff that I've done before. Yeah.
Where's your decision to use steel tube sets come in? Because you can use carbon or titanium or aluminium. Is that a personal preference?
I think
or is that to suit the customer you're designing a bike for?
Yeah, I mean, steel, there's a number of reasons why I particularly like steel. I am personally quite drawn to the material. I love the material. I think a big part of that is, again, talking about the bikes I like to design, is that all the bikes have an element of multifunctionism to them. Steel is great for those types of bikes. You can do an Audax on a Sunday, ride 100 miles on a bike that is a performance bike, like the Strail, or even the Sacan, but a week later you can put 25 kilos on the back and go touring because of the strength of the material. Unless it's, you couldn't generally do that with a carbon bike. You could with Thai, but Thai is almost double the price. And another thing I think about design is, you know, I want as many people as possible to ride it. I want it to be accessible, and so price is a factor. And I think Thai will always be I'd certainly do another Thai bike. We may do a Thai bike, but I definitely have that sort of strong feeling for steel. Certainly tubular bikes, I love the sort of simplicity of the way that they are built. So even though we put a lot of thought into tube shapes and all different elements of the design, ultimately they are tubes that are welded together, and there's a simplicity to it. You can look at it and understand it, much in the same way that people like Land Rover Defenders and the sort of utilitarian aspects of it. My personal taste is very drawn to that. Yeah. So.
Okay. And working for a small brand like Fairlight must give you a certain freedom that working for a big brand like Specialized Trek wouldn't allow you. So
we do have freedom, and I think from day one, sort of very fortunate. My business partner is very strong in the same belief, is that we absolutely believe that if we do, we can make mistakes, but the one thing we absolutely must do is focus on product. And we believe that if we get the products right, everything else will follow. And being a small business and flexible and having a good relationship with Reynolds, having great collaborators like Bentley, who I worked with at Pace and who did some stuff for me at Wold, I'm able to pull on those resources and really put a lot of time and thought and resource into the design element. And yes, we do have a flexibility. You do sometimes need to, you haven't got the financial leverage, but often these companies like Reynolds are excited to be able to push their boundaries of their design with a smaller company because it's a flagship for their products as well, almost. So, yeah, that answers it in a roundabout way.
you touched on geometry a little while ago.
Yeah.
How important are a few degrees here or there? What difference does it actually make to a viewer might watching, wondering difference between a slack head angle, a steep head angle,
it's
trail and
geometry is obviously important. You can't just put any head angle, any seating on a bike and expect it to handle well. I think for particular types of bikes, there's certain parameters you would probably work within. So a road bike, typically the head angles are quite steep. You want fast, almost twitchy handling, so you can who are going at speed down the descent, and you see a couple of cowpats in the road and you want to weave between them, you can do it because that's how quick and agile the bike needs to be. But something like this behind, which is more of a, call it gravel adventure, or certainly has the capability to go off-road, then you do want more stability, and the way we would do that is we would lengthen the wheelbase to give stability. So that means lengthening the chainstay by only 10 mil in this instance, slackening the head angle slightly, but we also increase the rake on the fork so that we're bringing the trail numbers back to what sort of the trail numbers are. Trail is quite important because that gives us the trail is really the combination of head angle and fork rake, and it tells you how quick or how slow the bike's going to steer. And then you'll think about sort of things like effective top tube, so stem length can affect steering. So a lot of the bikes in this category are going almost mountain bikey, they're going very long and running very short stems. And that's one way to do it. My own thought on that is it has quite a limit on fit, but yeah, so geometry is very important, and we do give a huge amount of consideration to it. We talk about it a lot, we test different things, and can you feel half a degree? Maybe not. Can you feel a degree? Possibly. So yeah, there is a window of where things become that you are able to sense it. Especially for me, if I know what I'm thinking about, what I'm looking for, then yeah, you probably can start to feel that change.
Okay. You mentioned you have a strong relationship with Reynolds for developing the steel tube sets. How much development potential is there in the steel tube set? Is there still plenty of scope for pushing it further than you currently have done?
I think certainly in a tubing capacity, in terms of the way that they make tubes, they're probably quite close to the limits. 853 is an extremely strong steel. With steel design, it's all about, or actually with any tubular bike design, it's all about strength and stiffness. They're the two numbers you're looking for. So they sound like quite general terms, they're not, they're engineering terms. So stiffness, if I had an 853 tube in this shape, 20 by 30, and a 631 tube in that shape with the same wall thickness, even though 853 is a lot stronger, the way they flex is exactly the same. You put the same amount of force into those tubes, they will move in exactly the same way. The difference with 853 is it is stronger, so it will, if you're flexing to this point, the 631 tube may eventually fail, but the 853 tube would keep going, but the way that they're flexing is the same. So it's the amount of load you can put in that's different. 853 is extremely hard, 953 is even harder. I can't think, Reynolds would be able to comment better than me, but it's probably almost impossible to go, not impossible, but to go beyond the hardness of 953 within a steel. But also when you get that hardness, you have problems with workability. The cost of the frame is very high because of tooling wear. The process is that much harder. I really feel that 853 is a great sweet spot between hardness or strength, so that you can get tubes down to sort of 0.4 mil, which we use on the Strail. And yeah, I wouldn't want everyone probably go less than 0.4 mil, because it doesn't matter how strong the steel is, you're going to start having issues with like coat canning effect, so effectively denting of tubes, things like that. In terms of moving steel designs forward, there's things like 3D printing. So we're certainly a long way off being able to 3D print a whole bike, and I don't know if that will ever be a thing because of the way that 3D printing is structured. But things like dropouts, cable guides, there's obviously brands like robots in the mountain bike sector doing lugs, things like that. I think it's great to see those sort of evolutions, and we keep our eye on those sort of things, and we may at some point progress into using 3D printing more. But I think in terms of where we're taking steels, we're quite close to its limits, I would say, yeah.
Okay. Finally, how does it feel to see a person riding a bike you designed out on the road or trail?
Yeah, I mean, it's brilliant. I mean, it does make it all worthwhile when you get an email from a customer saying, I've just ridden my Sukan, it's absolutely brilliant, feels stable, feels fast, feels nimble, because it's just all the work you put in, and it is a huge amount of work to get, even, like I said, when I look at it, I think, oh yeah, I can see why I've done that and done that and done that, why didn't I do it 2 years ago? but then I think really hard about it and all the problems we had to overcome to get to it, the revisions of things like dropouts, 2 or 3 or 4 revisions, choosing materials for the cable guide, thinking about how it's going to attach, having Reynolds say, oh no, we can't do that tube, it's going to fail, we'll need to change the butt. All the different questions until you get to a point where you're really happy with the design and you get it out there, and then you're waiting thinking, we couldn't have done a better product than that, given what we knew at that time. And you get the email or photo and saying, Dom, I love the bike, and it honestly makes it all worthwhile. It's far better than getting, on payday or the brand doing well financially, having that, knowing that people are out enjoying the bikes and that that it's affecting their life or their mindset in a positive way. That is, it's brilliant. Yeah, it's definitely a big part of it.
Brilliant, fantastic.
Yeah.
Well, thanks Dom, thanks for your time. Very interesting chat.
No problem.
Yeah, thanks to you. Thanks to you viewers for watching. I hope that's interesting. If you've got any questions for myself or for Dom, put them in the comment section below and we'll get them answered. If you enjoyed watching the video, hit that like button. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel as well. But that's all for now. Thanks for watching. I'll see you again next time.
Thank you.